constitutionally authorized. Number 5, rescind the bin Laden raid. Instead of authorizing the Navy SEALs to take him out, President Paul would have sought Pakistan's cooperation to arrest him. Oh, well, there's extremism right there. Well, first of all, before we even go into the details of this, think about this. 99% of the country is just pumping their fists in the air, USA, USA, with the capture of bin Laden. So here's a guy who comes along and says, now wait a minute, obviously we're all happy about the capture of bin Laden. Ron Paul would have brought it about years earlier because he wouldn't have been distracted by the ridiculous neocon mission to nowhere in Iraq, and he would have used the letters of marque and reprisal to pinpoint bin Laden. So he would have had him wouldn't have spent trillions of dollars over 10 years to catch one old man, for heaven's sake. But more specifically here, just from the start, just think about the fact that you got 99% of the country thrilled about this, not thinking about any of the details, and yet Ron Paul says, now wait a minute, hold on a minute, people. There are some considerations here that are being left out of the discussion, and I want to insert them into the discussion. I mean, here's a guy who obviously, he's smart enough to know he could have gotten along a lot more easily if he had just gone along with the conventional wisdom, shut his mouth, and let that be that. But yet, at this moment, he nevertheless says, now wait a minute, I have some concerns about this. Regardless of your position on Ron Paul or this issue, you have to respect this. Somebody who will tell the whole country, I think you're missing something. Think about people who are very much opposed to Ron Paul. Think about their candidates. When have their candidates ever in their entire lives, from the moment they were running for class president up to now, when have they ever taken a position like that? Well, of course, never. And basically, Ron Paul's position is simply that why unnecessarily alienate Pakistan, which is a country you need their help in the so-called war on terror. Why would you unnecessarily antagonize them? And his view is that, look, obviously if bin Laden were holed up in England, we wouldn't just go in there and grab him. Obviously there would be a cooperative effort with England. And he's just suggesting that perhaps this imperial arrogance that says, well, we're the USA, we can act however we want, and who the heck cares? Pakistan is one of what Mo Sizlak on The Simpsons called one of these loser countries, so we don't need to treat them with respect. Maybe there might be other ways of acting in the world. That's all. Just thinking. Sorry for being so extreme. Number 6, you'll never believe this one. Simplify the census. Oh man, throw this guy in jail. Simplify the census. My gosh, what an extremist. And this is the summary of Ron Paul's view. The questions posed by the Census Bureau's annual American Community Survey are, quote, both ludicrous and insulting, Paul says. Well, I'll deal with this one on my resource page. But basically, constitutionally, they can ask you, your name and how many people are in your household. That's about it, and that's his view. That's all he's saying. He's just repeating what the Constitution says. That makes you an extremist. Number 7, let the oldest profession be. And the summary here is, Paul wants to legalize prostitution at the federal level. Well, not quite. It's not that he wants to legalize it. His argument is the federal government has no authority over it in the first place. Has no authority over it in the first place. This obviously is a state issue. And constitutionally, who could deny that? And here we have the guy who, of all congressmen in Washington, is the guy least likely to use a prostitute, and he's the one being smeared as being pro-prostitution. Now, his view is the federal government has no role in it, and they don't call it the world's oldest profession for nothing. It has a way of perpetuating itself, and the way most societies have dealt with it is not by fruitlessly trying to stamp it out everywhere, but more or less through social norms. It winds up being confined to the bad part of town, and so on and so forth. Even St. Thomas Aquinas said that prostitution could be legally tolerated, and he was not a hippie. Number 8, legalize all drugs. Oh, again, unthinkable, because our overlords have told us, Hillary Clinton and Mitt Romney have told us, nothing to see here, people, this is the most super policy in the history of mankind. Regardless of how failed and futile it is, I did a video on this that I'll refer you to again on my resource page. But here again, Ron Paul's position is that this is not a federal issue. Now, when Prohibition came along, they had to amend the Constitution to prohibit alcohol, and yet suddenly you can prohibit all these drugs just through a legislative act. So his view is, no, this is up to the states, and maybe some states will come up with a more humane solution to this problem than just cracking some skulls and throwing people into cages. Number 9, keep monopolies intact. because Ron Paul opposes federal antitrust legislation, calling it, quote, much more harmful than helpful. So again, no attempt to refute Ron Paul, because again, our friend Josh Harkinson, he's kind of forgettable, I keep having to look up his name, but Harkinson's view is that, well, you know, it's supposed to be opposed to monopoly, right? That's what antitrust legislation says it's about, so I'll just believe that that must be what it's about. Now, how many books on antitrust law do you think Josh Harkinson has read, right? I mean, my guess is you take all the books on antitrust that have ever been written, you roll them into a ball, you get rid of them, and what remains is pretty much what he's read on this subject. So again, on my resource page, I'm going to refer you to some stuff on this. I've written about this in my Politically Incorrect Guide to American History. But basically, the exact opposite of what you've been taught about antitrust is correct. And you're not going to hear many economists who make very good livings serving as consultants and expert witnesses in antitrust cases speaking out against the conventional wisdom. But it's based on a theory of monopoly that is unfounded. And empirically, the way antitrust has been used is utterly irrational, has done untold damage to the economy, and has consistently harmed consumers from the get-go. It was never designed to help consumers. It was always a scam from the start. And when you read the real history of antitrust, you will not believe it. But Josh Harkinson won't. All he knows is antitrust protects us from monopolies. So if you're against this, you must favor monopolies. Good grief. Number 10, lay off Ben Bernanke. Now, he means lay off like, fire him. Because Ron Paul would abolish the Federal Reserve and revert to the use of currencies that are backed by hard assets such as gold. Well, this is a big issue, the Federal Reserve, but the implication here is it's extreme to be against the Federal Reserve, because don't you know what a wonderful institution it is and the wonderful stability it's given us? Sure, the Great Depression occurred under the Fed's watch, and the horrific ordeal we're enduring now occurred under the Fed's watch, but, you got to overlook, they're going to have some problems. Well, in fact, real statistics, not the phony baloney ones that were used 20 years ago, but up-to-date statistics show that the economy actually has not been more stable, has not had fewer and shallower recessions in the age of the Fed, and meanwhile the Fed has debased the dollar to about 4% of its earlier value. Ron Paul's position is competition. Why give the dollar artificial advantages? If you want to keep using it, go ahead. But take the artificial disadvantages off gold and silver if people want to transact in those. I mean, isn't this a free country? What is the big deal about that? Number 11, stop policing the environment. Now, here's the description here. Ron Paul believes that climate change is no big deal, and the Environmental Protection Agency is unnecessary. Most environmental problems, in his view, can be addressed by enforcing private property rights. Okay, but didn't you just say he favors stop policing the environment? But then you say environmental problems can be addressed by enforcing private property rights. Wasn't that kind of a contradiction? He's obviously not going to stop policing the environment, but his view is that there's a different way of going about it, a more effective way, a more just way, a more environmentally sound way, and that is through private property rights. In the 19th century, that was the method that was used. Up until, well, maybe the mid-19th century, the courts suddenly decided to abandon that approach of finding who the polluter was and punishing him. No, instead, the thought was, well, look, hey, we need some pollution for progress, so we're just going to regulate it. Well, you can get away with some pollution, we'll just regulate it. And so forget about if you have some kind of nuisance complaint or, there's some pollution, on your property. Hey, look, it's just the price you have to pay for progress. Well, Ron Paul's view is that, well, that's not just at all. If there's a property violation, it ought to be addressed. So I will, again, refer you to information on that, and you'll find that it's an entirely sensible position, and it makes perfect sense from the point of view of private property, people's individual rights, and the environment. So he's not going to stop police. It's just, again, totally misleading.